The world is full of idealistic young people who want to do their part in changing the world and making it a better place. I would count myself among them. But over the past few years, I've started to realize that we idealistic young people are also potentially dangerous, because we're trying to help without really knowing what we're doing. You've probably heard of volunteerism or service learning. It basically refers to groups of usually young Western do-gooders traveling to an impoverished area or country to volunteer at projects like building a school or teaching English or planting trees. But these kinds of projects, I would argue, often do more harm than good. I want to tell you about my journey, both literally and figuratively speaking, through various service trips, and the ideas that I've come up with as a result about how I think we need to transform these kinds of trips in order to make them truly worthwhile. When I was 14, naive and curious, I signed up for a group at my school called Team Ghana. As part of this group, I and 20 others in my year travelled to Ghana during our holidays to teach English and dig ditches at our sister school. In matching t-shirts and with lesson plans all prepared, we rocked up at the school for a week that arguably is why I'm standing here today. It was the beginning of a period of ongoing thought for me. And I have to say, my 14-year-old self thought it was fantastic. In fact, so much so that I went back to Ghana on 2 more occasions while I was still in high school. But the more time I spent involved in this project, the more I began to question it. Certainly on my 3rd trip to Ghana, there was a growing, nagging thought in the back of my head saying, "What are you doing here?" And I was becoming more and more skeptical of what we were really going there to do, because it seemed like the old service trip cliche that they gave us so much more than we gave them. And yet, we were calling this a service trip. When I graduated from high school in 2014, I uprooted and moved to the country of Honduras in Central America. Now, at the time, Honduras had the highest homicide rate of any country in the world. So naturally, my parents were terrified. In Honduras, I was working for the UK-based charity Project Trust at an orphanage for ex-street children. I was a teacher, a nanny, an organizer, and a big sister figure to the 39 children of the home, who came from backgrounds of immense poverty, abuse, and neglect. Working in Honduras as a long-term volunteer meant that I got to see these kinds of short-term service trips that I had for so long been a part of from a different perspective, as they came in to the orphanage where I was working. Finally, I was able to see just how detrimental these kinds of service trips can be, especially in terms of abandonment syndrome, disruption of routine, and ineffective use of time and resources. These people didn't understand Honduran culture or the organizational structure of the home, and they were coming in and creating disruption that meant that children weren't finishing their homework and chores, and every time they left with their cameras full of adorable photos, they left behind these 39 very confused children. And as a long-term volunteer, I was able to see just how much they were impacted by this. I'd like to share with you a story that I was told by a long-term missionary in Honduras. There was an area near the city where I lived called San Jorge, and it was a noticeably poor area. One year, a few years ago now, a US-based charity came to Honduras and decided to build new houses for some of the families from San Jorge in another part of the city to, provide them with safe and secure housing where they could raise their families, and in principle this idea sounds fantastic. But what these people didn't know was that San Jorge is a gang center. Gangs are a huge problem in Honduras and are largely the reason for the country's incredibly high murder rates. And San Jorge is a center of this. It's so gang-controlled that even the police can't enter. And any Honduran knows this. But they didn't. So what they basically did when they built these new houses was they spread the influence, the gang influence, from San Jorge to a whole nother part of the city, thereby increasing the violence and doing far more harm than good. Trying to work in a culture that you don't understand can have drastically negative implications, and good intentions are absolutely not enough. Short-term service trips provide simplified development issues that untrained Westerners feel able and entitled to help with. These trips make complicated issues seem simple by putting emphasis on short-term goals that short-term volunteers can easily accomplish to gain a sense of achievement. Things like build a school, or teach a child, or plant a certain number of trees. But what these ideas fail to recognize is just how complicated development issues are. Poverty, inequality, violence, and crime. There are no easy, short-term solutions for these problems. Having said that, I know that nobody goes to Ghana, or anywhere else for that matter, with the aim of causing harm. Of course not. You go, as I did, because you believe that in some way you can help. But the truth is, you can't. I'm not talking here about trained and qualified professionals. I'm talking about young, untrained, foreign volunteers. Think about it this way. The resource that developing countries usually have above all others is unskilled labor. They don't need you as well. That being said, I think there is one aspect of these trips that is invaluable. And that is the chance to see a totally new part of the world and the impact that this can have on your perspectives. Before living in Honduras, I had never been the only white person in a room before, or the only English speaker, or the only one who had finished high school. I'd never experienced living without electricity and water for days at a time. I'd never seen dead bodies on the streets, or gang graffiti lining the walls of a city that I call home. I'd never spoken to a 9-year-old girl about how she used to work in the sex industry, or listened as an 8-year-old boy told me about the time he watched his father shot 3 times and fall backwards off a bridge into the river, dead. I'd also never danced bachata, or made tortillas on a regular basis, or invited my Honduran friends over for a dinner of pasta and tomato sauce, which for some reason they couldn't understand the appeal of. These experiences change you in a way that I don't think you can be changed from the comfort of your own home. And that is valuable, even if it is only for you. And I think that's reason enough to travel to a developing country. But it requires you to go there with the aim of learning. I think we can make several fundamental changes to how we do service trips that can lead them to becoming more valuable both for the volunteers and for the people that they're trying to benefit, which is arguably more important. Western teenagers shouldn't be taught to believe that they can help Ghana better than trained Ghanaians. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be going to Ghana. There are 3 things that I think need to happen in order to make these service trips worthwhile. First of all, If a group of untrained foreign volunteers is going to go to a developing country for a short period of time, it shouldn't be a service trip. If you're not trained for the job that you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Secondly, discussions about development theory in general and about the political, historical, economic, and socio-cultural situation of the country that you're going to in particular should be learned about and discussed, both prior to the trip and throughout it as these concepts are put into context. This makes volunteers think about how the work that they're doing fits into the development of the community, the country, and the world as a whole. And it both educates and humbles the volunteers. It's so important that these people question their motives and ability to create necessary, lasting, and impactful change. And thirdly, volunteers need to understand the limited impact that any service trip is going to have. They can't go into this thinking that they're going to make fundamental changes to the community or change the lives of the people that they're going to meet. Volunteers are guests in these communities and need to act as such, not only respecting but appreciating the host culture. The aim shouldn't be to serve them. It should be to learn about and from them. Based on these ideas, I and several others have been working to found the NGO Educate, which supports education-related projects in Honduras. We believe that education is at the root of sustainable development, and that it must be Hondurans that are acting to create this change. So we as directors act merely as facilitators for them. We in the West are not superior, and we need to stop with this mentality of service that's perpetuating this toxic idea. If development and human rights is something that you're interested in, then travel can be a great way to gain first-hand knowledge. Be curious, but be humble. Go out into the world with your eyes and your mind wide open, and learn as much as you can. Thank you very much.